Guten Tag from Deutschland. Coming from Berlin, Germany. We're going to talk about Berlin, what I love about the city, a few things that are just okay, and then I even have one thing I really hate about Berlin. So here we go. Okay, the first thing I love about Berlin, Germany are the electric scooters. Now, Berlin is hardly the only town to have electric scooters or electric bikes, but there are a ton of them. And I got up early in the morning on my first day and spent 5 hours from about 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. exploring the entire city. The streets were empty. Remember, it's summertime in Europe, the sun gets up really early. And so the streets were empty, and I just drove that scooter to my heart's content. I went to the Berlin Wall, to Museum Island. I explored the area around Brandenburg Gate, and it was neat to see some of the sights of the city completely alone, except for a handful of other early birds. And so I would recommend that highly. In fact, it's not just a tip for Berlin, but maybe any other big city you go to. I think it's a good idea on your first day there, if you're going to be, say, in New York for 4 days, or Chicago, or Amsterdam, take a tour early that first morning, whether it's a hop-on, hop-off bus. Perhaps in Amsterdam or Chicago, it's a river tour or a canal tour, or anything else. You'll get the feel of the city, you'll get kind of the layout, the geography, and maybe even some impressions of where you want to spend most of your time. Some neighborhoods you'll like more than others, and so it's a good tip early on. Take a tour of the city. A few other things I loved about Germany. First of all, you got to try the currywurst. The currywurst is essentially a sausage and oftentimes some fries, and there's this sauce. It's about 80% ketchup and 20% curry flavor, but it is the cuisine of Berlin, and you can try it just about anywhere. In fact, I had some of mine right near Brandenburg Gate, and listen, it was delicious. I could get a little sick of it, I imagine, if I were having it more than once or twice a week, but hey, while you're in Berlin, check out the currywurst. You probably won't be disappointed. So here's another cuisine tip in Germany, made famous by John F. Kennedy when he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." A Berliner is a jelly donut, and you can find a number of bakeries throughout the city. Walk in one, and there's some delicious pastries, but try the jelly donut, try the Berliner. Some are better than others, admittedly, but it's certainly worth trying while you're in Berlin. Something of a surprise, Berlin's tap water was quite delicious. I love Berlin's tap water. Some places in Europe I've had not so good water, but in Berlin, tap water is crystal clear, tastes great. I love the new and old architecture in Berlin, and you see this in a number of places throughout the city. Remember, this is a town that was destroyed by World War II and pretty much completely rebuilt. There are a few places where you see the old church that's still standing, and a few other spots where that existed perhaps before World War II, but for the most part, this is a town that was completely rebuilt after World War II, and you feel a lot of this new and old architecture while you're there, and I think the architecture is something I really liked about Berlin. Okay, another thing to love about Berlin is the Ampelmann. The Ampelmann is the street sign, or the logo on the street crossings. Now, this originated in East Germany, and it's one of the few things that Germany as a whole has adopted from the culture of East Germany since the unification in 1990. And you see the Ampelmann all throughout Berlin. There's even stores that sell gear and merchandise with the Ampelmann on it. It's kind of a cool thing. So another interesting thing about Berlin is stores are often closed on Sunday. And I don't know that Berlin or Germany in general is a particularly religious country anymore. It seems that it's quite secular, but there are a number of shops that were just not open on Sunday, closed for business. And so I find that kind of refreshing. If you, of course, are a religious person, you kind of admire that, but even if you're not, it's something to admire that, hey, at least one day a week, a lot of the retail establishments are closed and people can spend time with their family. There's parts of Berlin that remind me a lot of Washington, D.C., or even of Paris, or maybe even a little bit of London, but it certainly feels like a capital city. You've got some memorials and monuments, and that architecture, like I say, is a mix between your classical and your modern European feel, and so it's something that I quite liked. I thought Berlin impressed on that front. And right in the heart of the city, you've got 5 or 6 of the national museums there that are certainly worth checking out, especially if you're there on a bad weather day. You can spend a lot of time in these museums. I was there on a hot day, and even then it was nice to have the air conditioning, and you can check out the paintings and some of the masterpieces that are in these museums, including the Ishtar Gate, which was fascinating to look at and see. And so I would definitely recommend spending at least some time in the museums at the Berlin Museum Island. Okay guys, here at Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and wow, here's a tip for you. Come in the evening time. This place is neat during the day, but in the evening time, they've got it lit up right now, and it's more glorious, looks more prestigious, and I think, yeah, this is something to see evening time, more so than the daytime. So you definitely want to visit the Berlin Wall, and the best place to do it is the East Side Gallery. This is the place that I went to on the scooter, and it's kind of a surreal experience, especially if you grew up and remember the Berlin Wall and some of the emotion that surrounded that as it fell in 1989. Seeing this is kind of surreal because when I was a kid, this separated lives, and it's just kind of interesting to see the divide that this is, and now how it's a place of art. But I do think I was kind of inspired by this little mural on the wall here, which I'll come around and show you, which kind of shows the division. And, you know, you see the faces there and the lives that were so changed by the wall for a whole generation. I thought Checkpoint Charlie was some place that was just all right. I think if you're there, you want to at least experience it and see it. It has a little bit of a tourist trap feel to it. You might even say it's a little bit like Times Square in New York City or Piccadilly Circus in London. And I wasn't too impressed with it, but you want to go there and check it out. Another thing that's just okay about Berlin, this is not a culinary destination that I would recommend above other places in Europe, particularly France and Italy. Now the food is not bad, but I think that if you're looking for just, you know, a scrumptious place where you're going to find a lot of good restaurants everywhere you go, you may not find Berlin as your top spot. So there's a lot to love about Berlin. There's a few things that are just okay. What is there to hate about this town? Well, if you've flown into Berlin, you know, because the 2 airports that service Berlin are just terrible. They're decades old, they're behind the times, and they're just bad airports altogether. Tegel and Schönefeld, I don't recommend one or the other because they're just both among the worst airports in Europe. Fortunately, this problem is going to turn around. They're building a new airport. In the next couple of years, the Berlin airport should be among the best airport in all of Europe. And so, there you have it. The one thing I hate about Berlin is the airports, both of them. In conclusion, I'll just say I think Berlin is an underrated city. I come at this from an American perspective. If you're an American, your tier 1 destinations in Europe are usually Paris, London, Rome. And maybe you have a tier 2 in cities like Barcelona, Athens, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, maybe Vienna, Prague. And Berlin would probably be kind of on the lower end of that tier 2. I just don't think it's a destination that's right at the top of the list for most Americans. And that's a shame because there's a lot to see here, a lot of history here, and it's really a fascinating city where you can spend many days. And so plan to go to Berlin. You You won't be disappointed at all.